Hello and welcome to this Friday edition of the Phil Talk Sports Podcast. Thank you if you're watching on YouTube or one of our Spotify or Apple Podcast listeners. As always, I'm your host, Phil Nunziata. Joining me today, my West Coast correspondent, NCAA broadcaster Nick Rice. Nick, how's it going over there?
Pretty good. Hearing from your other podcast, me living in America is kind of strange with all these people across the world that you do podcasts with.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. This Zoom video podcast, I think it's going to work out pretty well. So I guess let's jump right into it. We got, a couple different bits of news from a bunch of different sports to jump into, but I think the biggest one, me and you are both football guys, so I think it's a good place to start. Cam Newton agrees to a 1-year, $1 million deal with the New England Patriots. Surprising to some, not necessarily the move. For some, it's the money, the small amount, considering how much certain quarterbacks are getting paid these days. But when you first heard that news, Cam Newton to New England, what was your immediate thoughts?
Well, obviously, I was just completely thrilled about Cam Newton, such a legendary quarterback with the Panthers, getting his opportunity, and considering how his tenure with the Panthers ended, made it that much sweeter. With how late they waited in the process to finally let him go, and the lack of explanation too was I'm sure very traumatic to him. I mean, we've seen this in other instances. Like, the first thing that comes up to me is an Isaiah Thomas with Boston. I know it's basketball, but this man puts his body on the line to compete in playoff games with Boston a few years ago, and the Celtics shovel him out after the year, and he's never quite the same player. I hope that Cam Newton doesn't have a similar story with him, but he battled through countless injuries. And certainly, even with the injury concerns, he was worth taking a chance. And of all the teams, it wasn't too big of a surprise that New England was the one to take that chance.
Yeah, like you said, they did wait, quite a while to make this happen. But like you said, his saga in Carolina, there's something to be said about that. I mean, Carolina being a relatively young franchise compared to, say, the Eagles or the Chargers, Cam Newton is easily a top 3 player in Carolina's history. I only think maybe Steve Smith and Julius Peppers I'd put maybe ahead of him. So really, he's been the face of that franchise for a long time. And they signed Teddy Bridgewater before they even let him go. Like you said, it was very similar to Isaiah Thomas, not quite treating him the best. And then Ron Rivera goes to Washington, and some people think, oh, maybe he's going to bring Cam with him, and he kind of, ignores that whole thing and is going his own way, which is always a bad sign. You almost see like when college coaches go to the pros and they don't draft their college quarterback, it's usually like a red flag, like, oh, if his own coach doesn't want him, why should we? So, Cam Newton definitely said, I think we can both agree that Cam Newton deserves an NFL roster. He's easily a top 34, 35 quarterback. You can argue on if he should be a starter. Yeah, and you can argue if he should be a starter right now, but he should easily be on a roster. And for him to be in New England, of all places, it really feels like a Madden move. Like, you're playing franchise mode. Oh, Brady's getting old. Let me trade him. Oh, let me get Cam Newton. That'll be fun. I'll run around with him. It definitely feels that way. This is a very Bill Belichick move, I feel, but it's the world we're living in now.
Right. There's this narrative that Cam Newton, I mean, you mentioned top 34, 35 quarterback. And 2 years ago, saying something like that sounds ludicrous because in 2018, we all know that he was an MVP in 2015, but in 2018, when you're completing 68% of your throws and you're not a accurate quarterback, I'm looking at his numbers right now, 24 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. That sounds like a little better than a top 34, 35 quarterback. And we see guys like Nathan Peterman get thrown in, and he does what he does. And I'm a Chargers guy, so I love to see it. But when it comes to Cam Newton's productivity, I mean, people love to tag, he's injury prone and he's too big of a personality, which is just hilarious because I think we have bigger personalities in the league right now. But when it comes to Cam Newton, there just seems to be all of this ancillary talk with him on the field. MVP in 2015, what he did in 2018, his success in playoff games. I mean, there's just no denying that he's an NFL quarterback.
Yeah, like I said, people always give him he's this big personality guy, but Cam's never really had, issues on the field or off. I mean, he had the Super Bowl didn't go his way. He walked out of the press conference at the Super Bowl. He got, put through the wall for that one, but it came out that, he's sitting here, you just lost the Super Bowl, and apparently you can hear the other team celebrating while you're sitting at the podium. I think that's going to get to anybody. So,
yeah.
Cam Newton, it reminds me to a lesser extent, people always talk about how bad like T.O. was personality, but again, that's a guy that never got in trouble. Sure, he, banged heads with a couple guys, but do you think he's going to, because New England is not a personality-friendly place. I think we can both agree. Do you think whatever he does bring to the table on that level, is he going to be able to tone it down to make it work in New England?
I think the 1-year contract for him is perfect because I believe that that's the perfect amount of time that he can suppress some of his personality, because even though I do believe that he isn't a huge character concern, when you're with the Patriots, there's just a whole different level of character you have to have. So I think after a year, Cam Newton will enjoy the process. I think he will shock some people, and he will be of bigger demand next off season. And when it comes to Cam Newton, I think this year he will be on his best behavior with New England. I think that guy is ready for a breakout year. I think this guy is going to be really solid.
I think of it as what happened with Teddy Bridgewater, how he gets signed by the Jets as basically, let's see if there's anything there. Let's kick the tires. Has a great preseason, goes to the Saints, has a good 4-game run with the Saints, and now he's the starting quarterback for the Panthers, ironically enough. So I think if I'm Cam Newton, I'm like, yeah, I can fake anything for a year. Like I can make it work if I need to. I don't think – what's more likely? You think after this year that he becomes a long-term answer for the Patriots or a long-term – for somebody else?
I feel very strongly about this. This is the only year he's in New England, and it's not for a lack of ability. It's not because he's going to look like a quarterback that shouldn't be in the NFL. And there was 2 games last year when he was hurt, when it just looked. I don't know if you remember. I think it was a game against the Redskins the Panthers played last year. It was a Thursday night game, and Cam Newton could not complete passes in the flat. I mean, it was that bad. I mean, Cam Newton looked like he was laboring on every throw. So I think he certainly will be better than that. Sure. But I just believe that this is a 1-year rental, and I think he signs a nice contract to make up some of the monies he's losing right now with a organization that desperately needs a quarterback next year.
How many teams, I'm going to say between 3 and 5, how many you think are kicking themselves had they known that they could get Cam Newton for $1 million, are kicking themselves for not doing it? Granted, I don't know that he takes that deal anywhere. I think you could argue the only place he's taking that is New England. But, there was talks of Jacksonville. People think he should go there. They really want to ride this Gardner Minshew thing out, see how that works. Before the Bengals got Joe Burrow, people thought that would have been a good spot. There was talk of the Chargers, but they are pretty convinced that the Tyrod Taylor and the Justin Herbert situation is going to be the way to go. So he was linked to other teams, but New England just kind of laid in the weeds. Do you think any other team would have been a better fit, or do you think this is for 1 year as best as they could get for him?
Oh, I think 3 or 5 teams, absolutely. I mean, when it comes to Colin Kaepernick, who's still in the free agent market, if he gets signed, wherever he gets signed, I don't think teams are staying up at night wondering what we could have had, because, there's an argument with the amount of time he has off. With Cam Newton, I mean, when you look at his tape, there is such big ceiling. You're thinking, kind of like a Jameis Winston too. I mean, the ceiling is so immense. You're thinking this guy could really run the league for a year or two if he just gets, if everything kind of goes according to plan. I think 3 or 5 teams, absolutely. And, I preface this, I'm a big Charger fan. I think ultimately Anthony Lynn and that Chargers brass, to not give him a chance. I mean, and by this point, having months off, they didn't give him enough of a chance. And other teams, too, they will be kicking themselves if Cam Newton plays like I think he will, which is, a top 20 quarterback. I think he will be good enough to where teams will be pretty annoyed about what they did. But luckily for them, I believe Cam Newton is on the market next year, which I believe these teams, to some degree, were thinking of before he ends up signing with New England. We might get a shot next year or a year after, because he's not signing a long-term deal.
Yeah, I think also people were thinking that he's a guy that you pick, and this might be the spot for Jameis Winston now, the way everything's shaken out. Someone that gets signed week 4, 5, or 6 after an injury happens. That could have been a thought as well. So I think we both know that LA, and I'm calling him LA, I'm trying to get used to that. They were as linked to Cam as anybody else. Had he went to the Chargers, as a Charger fan, how would you have been excited about that? Would you have thought that would have affected the Justin Herbert growth, or would you have been happy to have Cam Newton?
Yeah, that is the interesting conversation. You kind of want rookies to play. I'm of the mindset, Patrick Mahomes is a special case. Aaron Rodgers is a special case. People like to use those arguments as to throw a rookie into the lion's den, and they forget some of the many cases where, like a Mark Sanchez and like some of these other guys, I think they get too big of a taste too early of all these hits. I mean, and unfortunately, I think an Andrew Luck had too much on his plate too early, and I think that contributed to eventually him retiring. I think when it comes to a rookie, give him a small plate, but put him on the field. I mean, having a guy redshirt more than a year, I think would be very detrimental. So I get the argument to not sign a Cam Newton because you think, well, this guy's got to be a starter right away. But ultimately, I think that you've got to put the best quarterback room, play the best quarterback, and give people an opportunity really to compete.
Yeah, I think had he gone there, it would have been. I think it might have even been the same situation. It would have been a one and done year, and then he would have had to find somewhere else. But being that he is in New England, do you think, the way Belichick works, this is a very un-Bill Belichick move, but do you think he's really trying to sell people that this is a QB competition? Like, Jared Stidham is the starter maybe when they're in the parking lot walking into the first practice. But then after that, like, do you think – we know the way Bill Belichick is. Do you think he's going to keep – how long do you think he'll keep up this facade that it's an open competition and anybody can win it?
Right. Yeah, that's how you do it. That's the page of the old Nick Saban playbook, and I just find it hilarious. How the water boy has a chance to be the quarterback, until he announces the minute before the season. But when it comes to this quarterback competition, I think there's legitimate if there was preseason or 4 games or whatever. I don't know what they're going to end up doing with the preseason.
They're down to 2 as of now, but who knows if that changes again.
Right. Yeah. Who knows? But I think legitimately before the start of the regular season, there is some argument considering just how immense that playbook is. I mean, it's like arithmetic or advanced calculus, the New England Patriots offensive playbook. I mean, you see certain guys like just never at wide receiver be able to understand all the different nuances. So there is something to that. But talent-wise, I mean, come on. There's absolutely no conversation. And I love how the Patriots, some of the brass like Stephon Gilmore and some other guys, even coaches were saying, Jarrett Stidham is this amazing quarterback when, he didn't take a single snap in a regular season game of any meaning last year. And I think he would have definitely had time, given what we saw last year, if he was better than what I think he is.
Yeah, the other thing too with that whole situation, the way they're handling it is some people had their backs and minds behind Stidham, and other guys almost refused to comment on it. That definitely has happened a couple times. But the thing with Cam Newton to New England, this is not the New England of the past 20 years. This is a team that Tom Brady couldn't get out of the wild card round with. So, or the first round that they played against the Titans. Granted, the Titans were on a tear this past year, but I think of, just because the player is talented, they don't always fit New England. Like you said, I think back to like when Chad Johnson played there, we were scratching our heads like, how does a guy that talented not work here? He caught like 12 passes the whole year. So like we've seen examples of guys not really, like you said, some guys are used to arithmetic and then they got to go take pre-cal in New England. So like, do you think there's a chance that this just completely blows up? Because this is a team that doesn't have as many weapons as they have in the past. Defense still pretty good. Is this a team that's, I'm thinking this is a 9-7, 10-6 team with Cam, where it was maybe a 7-9 win team with Stidham because the defense is going to win you a couple. Their division is as good as it's been in a while. The Bills are no joke, and the Dolphins are better than they have been in a while. I mean, you still have the Jets, and they're still the Jets as of right now. But, the division is still tougher than it's been in a while. So, like, what's the ceiling here? Do you think 10 wins is the ceiling? Do you where do you put them?
Yeah, I think 10 wins is the ceiling, and people may look at that and think, well, Cam Newton can't sniff what Tom Brady is. And I think Cam Newton is, by this point, pretty close to what Tom Brady is, talent-wise.
Sure.
However, like you said, people for the last 20 years have talked about New England being maybe a top 10 team talent-wise. But like you said, it's not about the talent with New England. And I didn't really think of it that way about this blowing up. But I think there is a possibility of that because, Cam Newton, nobody's going to mistake him for being the most accurate quarterback, which Tom Brady was. That means you've got to change the game plan. And nobody's also mistaking him for being the most cerebral and the most, brilliant quarterback who can make the audibles that Tom Brady does. And I think changing a complete offense on short notice because, he didn't get picked up in March like everybody else did, that is something. And during this COVID pandemic where, players aren't practicing physically like they were last year, I think all of that does play a factor in maybe Cam Newton not getting, throughout the preseason quite the love to be the absolute starter like usual. But I think that's a very low likelihood, even with all that considered, even with Ocho Cinco not working out the way he did, which still baffles me.
Yes.
I just think he's too good to not at least be a competent starter this year.
I mean, like you said, I think there's no way he does worse than if they just rolled out with Stidham, and I think Brian Hoyer is the third quarterback in that room. So yeah, I don't think it's gonna be somewhere between awful and Super Bowl. Like some people are kind of going one way or the other. I think we both agree that settling on 10 wins is probably how that works out.
Yeah, I think it's 9 only because of the departures on defense. I'm amazed people haven't talked more about that. I mean, it's literally been a mass exodus on defense. And I think if Cam Newton was picked up, Bill Belichick would be, by somebody else. Bill Belichick would even be more inclined to use this as a year to gain a better draft pick. But since Cam Newton is there, it sounds like they're really competing to make a roster spot because this 2020 Patriots defense might be unrecognizable. I mean, they literally got rid of almost every starter on defense. Obviously, Gilmore is still there, and that guy's awesome. But, across the board, they're going to look different this year.
Yeah, I think they could very well still be looking at that, that draft pick thing. Like, tanking is not something New England does, at least in this modern era. So it could just be let's try this. It's either going to work and it'll look like a genius. And if it doesn't, we're back in the, the situation that they might have been prior. So, it's worth the risk. Like you said, the money is the biggest bargain probably in the league ever. But, I'm pulling for Cam to succeed in a way that gets him on another team and he can extend his career for another couple of years because I don't think he's done. I think a lot of people are shipping him off a little too soon. And like you said, this might be a small stop here. Last question on this serious question. How many games does Cam need to win for some Boston restaurant to name a dish New England clam chowder? How long does that take?
I'm sure there's already something like that going on right now. I mean, I in New England would throw a celebration and not see Brian Hoyer taking snaps or Jarrett Stidham for week 1 of the year. So, I mean, I would already be having something like that.
Yeah.
But, good luck to them, because this team is going to look very different this year. I don't know if you knew this. The Patriots starting linebacker, it appears Dante Hightower is one of them, but Jawan Bentley is the favorite to be the other starting linebacker for the Patriots. So that's a little different.
Yeah, what a name. Bentley.
You're right. Yeah.
Lucked out on that one.
Yeah.
So let's pivot a little bit. I touched on how this is somewhat of a Madden move, Madden franchise move. Madden 21 is somewhat around the corner, and obviously when we get on this show, we talk a lot of Madden. This friendship was built off of Madden, so it's good to touch on sports gaming while we're here. The trailer and stuff, a lot of mixed reviews. Hashtag save franchise mode or whatever it is has been trending on Twitter, how they're not really touching on that. But what I want to bring up today is the cover athlete has been announced for a couple games. We're going to start with Madden. Lamar Jackson, Ravens quarterback, is the cover athlete. Some years they get it wrong. I think this year they got it right. I mean, the guy won the MVP. It's going to look great on the cover. I miss the years, and we'll talk about this in our next game that we're going to bring up. I miss when games cover athlete isn't necessarily the Super Bowl winner. It's just a really fun player. Like you think Sean Alexander, Donovan McNabb before he really hit his peak got on the cover. Ray Lewis, at the time I think they had just won the Super Bowl a couple years prior. But it's not always the peak athlete. It's just the fun athlete, and I enjoy that. And you think Peyton Hillis was a very out left field guy, but I prefer these. Like regardless if they won the Super Bowl. Granted, this is an MVP, so you can always point to that. I like when just these fun players get on the cover.
Well, I mean, I was going to ask you what you thought of Peyton Hillis being the cover in 2012.
So I don't know if I'm the only. I've had some people agree with me on this. That year they actually let fans vote on it. If you recall, you got to vote. I think Twitter was still in its infancy as far as everybody using it. But they were doing this Twitter poll, and it actually came down to Michael Vick on the Eagles and Peyton Hillis. And you can't convince me that Peyton Hillis won a fan vote. I think people were still not very comfortable with Michael Vick just coming back from incarceration. He was still repairing his image, something he ended up doing very well. He's now, successful in the media post NFL career. I don't think they were comfortable putting him on the cover. So I think they kind of swayed it into Peyton Hillis. Not that it wasn't cool. I mean, Cleveland needs something to celebrate, but I've always felt that way about the Peyton Hillis one. It would have been cool if Vic got it because he would have been the first athlete on Madden twice, with two different teams, obviously. So that would have been neat. But yeah, I mean, Peyton Hillis, it's kind of like a fun trivia question now. You got to remember a Cleveland Brown was actually on the cover, of it. And he was fun to watch for his couple of years in the league. He was super overpowered in the game, if you recall that year.
Right.
But, I mean, it was cool. I enjoy seeing random fun players like that. It was at the expense of Michael Vick at the time. I think he's fine with it by now. I mean, he's already on it once. Another fact, no one's ever been on Madden twice, but to my knowledge, Larry Fitzgerald is the only guy that was on the cover of Madden and NCAA. So I don't think we'll obviously never see anything like that again until one of those games come back. But yeah, it is what it was. That's always been my conspiracy theory about that, about how Peyton Hillis ended up on the cover. I don't know. Some people agree with me. Some people think I'm crazy, but that's always been my stance on that.
I'm with you because when you think about, riveting quarterback with the story that he has, Cleveland fullback who, we didn't know an hour ago. I'm with you. It just doesn't make any sense. With that said, I think when you consider first of all, shout out to Michael Vick and getting the career that he had and, rejuvenating what, looked like a lost career. Then he turned it around. And that seems to me like the story of Cam Newton in short order. With that said, I think when you consider all of the options for cover athlete for Madden 21, Lamar Jackson seems to be a clear choice. Patrick Mahomes back-to-back seasons, that seems not only a little redundant, but when you have the narrative of fix the franchise, the last thing you want is the cover of the game to be the exact same of last year because people are arguing the franchise is the exact same of last year.
I don't think anybody should ever be on it 2 years in a row. I don't care how good they are. I don't think that should ever happen.
Exactly. I mean, I'm off the top of my head thinking about, guys, Julio Jones, absolute no character, no personality. He just retired. Luke Kuechly, how interesting would he be to have him on a cover athlete for a 21? Mm-hmm. I'm thinking, there's not a whole lot of options here when it comes, that stack up to a Lamar Jackson.
The only other guy that I think, like, if I'm in that room, the only other name I throw out there, just because the year that he did have, would have been Derrick Henry.
Oh yeah, Derrick Henry.
But I think they got it right still. I mean, if Derrick Henry has another year like that, I think we already know who the 22 cover athlete would be. But he's really the only guy I'd put in that conversation.
I hate to cast aspersions, but that is a run I don't think the Titans pull off yet again. People are very quick to forget who Ryan Tannehill is.
Yeah, they're going to find out really quick too.
Yeah, Tennessee, unfortunate to them, I think they have spent too much money. They will pay a pretty hefty price to figure out who Ryan Tannehill really is. But, Madden 21, I know there was so much negative criticism when it comes to the game. And I'm on that list believing they could do a whole lot more. And don't give me the EA Sports owner to tell me how hard it is to make a game better when your game 10 years earlier had features you don't have now. But with all that said, it's still a fascinating game, and having Lamar Jackson as the cover athlete was the right choice.
Yeah, this is one of the few things they got right, and it really would have been hard to get wrong. Like, I think between the two of us, we came up with one other name that I think would have been okay in Derrick Henry. Because, like you said, might not happen again. He would be almost like a Sean Alexander type cover athlete. It's like, oh yeah, remember when he was a thing? So that's something that could happen. So that athlete's out there. I think that was the right choice. Moving to the NBA, 2K actually, a more interesting choice, one that I also like. So they announced that the cover athlete, the first one that came out is Portland Trailblazers guard Damian Lillard. I think if you're into basketball, he's someone you're a fan of. The wording I remember seeing is one of the athletes, and I was like, I wonder what that is going to entail. So basically what happens is, we'll get to the next one first, but how do you feel about Damian Lillard? To me, that's another guy real basketball fans know, super exciting. I mean, Russell Westbrook, I think, has been on NBA Live covers, and I think once you're on one, unless you're like Kobe Bryant or something, it's hard to get on another. I think that's a very video game choice, I think. I'm pretty happy with it. There's a couple different directions you could have went, but how do you feel about Damian Lillard on the cover? To me, it's a breath of fresh air. It's not, James Harden again. It's not LeBron again. Paul George got it a couple years ago. That was nice. But how do you feel about Damian Lillard on the cover?
Yeah, I think it's solid. I think it would have been pretty cool, something to think about is Kawhi Leonard and the Clippers. Now, I don't know when's the last time he had, a cover athlete, if he ever has. I mean, he doesn't say 2 words, so, I don't know how marketable that guy is. But when it comes to the story of the 2020 season, I do think of Kawhi Leonard before I think of Damian Lillard. With that said, with his walk-off against Paul George last year, I think it's a pretty solid choice too.
Yeah, I think sometimes when you think about it, they base it off of the year prior. So, obviously in that when you boot up that game, when they do their little highlight package, that's going to be the shot right before the logo hits you in the face on the screen.
That's right.
That shot over Paul George too. But so, I thought that was cool. Like, me and you talked about it when it first popped out. We're like, oh, what an interesting choice. I like that. And again, in the wording, it said one of the athletes. So I was like, okay, what does that mean? So Damian Lillard is going to be the cover athlete on the current gen console. So he'll be the Xbox One cover athlete, the PS4 cover athlete, the next gen of consoles, the Xbox Series S, I think they're calling it. And then, you never know what Xbox is going to call it. And then obviously the PS5, when that comes out, the cover athlete is going to be Zion Williamson of the Pelicans. And this one, when you don't think about it at all, you're like, oh, perfect. Zion's, already one of the most marketable guys in the league. Very true. This guy's played, and I'm a fan of his. I watched him at Duke. I watched most Duke games. I'm in no way a dismisser of how good he can be. But as a guy who's played, I think, 20 games in his rookie season, not counting when NBA comes back, which we'll get to in a minute, I'm all for Zion getting on one of these covers. Do you think it's too soon? Because, I hate to poo-poo the party, but I feel like it's a little too soon. It'd be like,
yeah, I think you're poo-pooing the party there, Phil. And that's what we do on this podcast. I don't know if you guys, for those of you joining us for the first time, we had like 2 or 3 different targets last podcast of just guys we're going to hone in on and we're going to criticize. And for this show, it's going to be Zion Williamson. And, I'm with you. It's a little too soon. We don't know. We want to believe that Zion Williamson is going to be, a legend. And when you think about young players you could put on the next generation console, when you think about it, he's the most marketable. He's the most exciting. But, it's not deniable that he's also the most injury prone, and he's also on a team that probably has one of the lowest ceilings among all the West playoff teams. So, yeah, it is, to me, a little bit early because you'd hate to have NBA 2K come out fresh off of this playoff run where Zion struggles and they miss the postseason. So,
yeah,
I think it's a little early.
I also think because it would almost be like if you put Lamar Jackson on the cover of Madden this past year, and you're before this MVP season when he just had that run that got the Ravens in the playoffs. And they got dismantled by your Chargers, if I remember correctly. Like, if you put him on the cover following that year, I would have been – people know that he's exciting to watch. But if Williamson had, played the whole year, been in the, Rookie of the Year conversation with John Morant, No problem at all. I think I wouldn't even think twice about it. And I think they're just so ready for this guy to be the marketing, machine that he's
Mhm.
gonna be. Um, I think it wouldn't have hurt to push it to next year. Like I think he's gonna play all
Yep.
next year. He'll be healthy by then. Everything's good to go. You gotta remember this injury really came from college with him. So he would have
Yeah.
been ready to go by next season. I think you let him do his thing. It's like I don't think Blake Griffin was ever on the cover. He's on the cover of college basketball. He might have been on the cover of NBA Live or something. I'm not as familiar with that series, but it would have been like Blake Griffin, one of the most exciting, the dunks and everything. You wouldn't have had any issue with it, but this year just seems a little too soon, and I think most people would agree. Again, this is a player that I enjoy watching. I haven't tuned into a West Coast start time NBA game. I've never planned my day around it, except
Yeah.
when Zion played his first game. Like I had to,
Yeah.
this past season. So I love the guy. He's going to be really exciting to watch. He makes the New Orleans Pelicans a watchable team, which is not a sentence I think I've ever said. So, I mean, I think it's cool, but I do think it's too soon. I think we're both agreeing on this now. Like, it wouldn't have hurt to wait another year. But that being said, who would you have put there? You're saying Kawhi Leonard, even though he's not as marketable, would have been a good year to put him on.
Yeah, but I understand the new generation. You can't. I mean that Kawhi doesn't feel like a new generation anymore. In fact, his resume is just incredible. When you think about all the Finals MVPs and whatnot. But young players, I think, man, it is interesting to consider a John Morant, who played a whole year and he looks pretty solid. But even second-year players or third-year players who have taken the league by storm, I think there are some pretty legitimate options. I mean, just to circle back, Peyton Hillis looked very early in his career, and he didn't really accomplish. He accomplished more, I think, than what Zion has already.
Mhm.
And Peyton Hillis looked like the next big thing, but it didn't turn out that way. So, like you said, I just think they're kind of hitching their wagon to this a little earlier than they should.
I do think, I am, poking him down a little bit. I do have to throw him a bone on this. Normally, in a normal year, the NBA season would have been over already. There would have been a champion crowned by now. If the Clippers end up winning the title, I think he's your cover athlete because I could see it already. In 2K, my DMs are open if you need, for this IP. But you do a Kawhi Leonard cover. He's, had the Clippers, if they pull it off, and they still can, the season's about to reboot, he would have been
Mm-hmm.
one of the first guys to have been the star player on a championship team in 3 different cities. So your cover could have been him holding the trophy with the Spurs, him holding the trophy with the Raptors, and then the Clippers. It would have made a great cover. So had the season been over, I think you could have made it Kawhi Leonard. But the Zion, it's still going to be cool. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but that's what we do here, I guess. I think it would have been great if he had a whole season, a whole body of work behind him, to really get that. Um, Going back to Damian Lillard, though, do you almost feel it's like a consolation prize? Like you're going to be the last gen cover athlete, whereas most people are going to, for the early adopters that buy the new console right away, you're not going to get that version of it. Like, is it slighted at all? Like if you're Damian Lillard, you're like, oh, cool, I'm finally on the cover of 2K, which I think anyone that plays basketball on any level is probably a dream come true. So you're on it, but you're not at the same. Like you're the guy. You're a guy. You're not the guy. Would that bother? You think that bothers him at all?
I think that is such a reach. I mean, maybe a little bit, but I don't think Damian Lillard is thinking about that at all. I think this is to be a cover athlete for an NBA game once a year. That's awesome in and of itself. I don't think people are going to think that. In fact, I think if I'm not mistaken, the 2K game, I know the Madden game does this. The game for the 21 carries over for the PlayStation. It carries over with. In fact, if you buy the game on the PS4, you get the free game for the PS5. I don't know if Series X works like that, and if 2K works like that, but I wonder if they do.
Yeah, I actually was listening to something earlier in the day that says I think if you buy which we're actually a good segue there, the Kobe Bryant edition, the Mamba edition that they're making, which that's a no-brainer. I assumed Kobe was just going to be on the cover throughout everything, and it would have been fine. But yeah, if you buy the Kobe edition, which I think it's going to be like $100, maybe $120, it covers both generations and everything, and that again, that's a no-brainer. It reminds me of well, as a Magic fan, someone that's not a fan of the team in Miami, I think that Dwayne Wade cover they did last year for the premium edition, one of the coolest covers ever. It is Dwayne Wade in the like Miami Vice style jerseys that they wear sometimes. Um, so that's a new thing. Obviously, they do their premium edition. Madden's done that a couple times. They had T.O. on the cover. I think 18 when Antonio Brown was, and then the premium edition had that. So do you think most people, I think you're at that point, you're just going to buy the Kobe Bryant edition so it covers both of them and it passes both these younger guys up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man. That's on pre-order. I will be scrambling. I will be stumbling over every person in my way to get that Kobe Bryant edition because my goodness, if there's any storyline for the 2020 year, it's Kobe Bryant, and I can't wait to get my hands on that.
So
and see what they do. I don't know exactly what that game's going to look like.
Mm-hmm. I remember, some of the earlier years, 2K11, 2K12, when the game really blew up, and they had that mode where you kind of played through Michael Jordan's career. If you remember that, it was one of those years. I could see them doing something like that with Kobe. That'd be pretty badass, really. So you're gonna be a PS5 guy, I assume. You're sticking with PlayStation moving forward, or?
Yeah, it's tough though because the Series X looks pretty solid too. But yeah, I think PS5 is pretty safe way to go.
Yeah, I've been rolling with I had PS2. I had a 360 for a while. I ended up switching to the 3. I'm so many generations deep into PlayStation that it just wouldn't make sense to switch over. Obviously, and supposedly there's gonna be some backwards compatibility with these new consoles. So I don't know how much, but maybe it'll be enough to enjoy some of these older games. But I think it'd be hard for me to not get PS5. I'm too deep into Sony at this point.
Oh yeah, if I'm not mistaken, PS4 had backwards compatibility, but it's just such a few title list,
Yeah, exactly.
Doesn't make sense. But do you know how much the PS5 costs? I have no idea.
They have not. I remember watching that Sony did the the video stream conference where they showed you what it looked like and stuff, but there's no price out yet, which only scares me. You ever go to a restaurant, you open the menu and there's no prices on the menu? That's how you know it's going to cost a lot. The fact that they haven't announced the price of this yet, that's how you know it's. I think we're looking at $5. I think we're looking at $500 for this thing, if I had to guess.
I hear, but I wouldn't be shocked, man. Yeah. Just be ready. Be ready, okay? Open up that checkbook. Be ready.
Exactly. But I'm usually not someone to buy the console right away because there's always bugs in it. There's always, I didn't jump to the Xbox One PS4 for about a year. I waited. I gave it some time. I waited till I sometimes even wait. They always bring out that second model and everything's smaller and sleeker and doesn't overheat, but who knows how it's going to go with this one. But that's usually my plan of attack. Who knows? I might get a hair and just go out and buy it. I either wait a year or buy it at launch. It just matter how I feel that day. So I
mean, this is the coronavirus era, all right, Phil. So I think this is a different year. It's gonna be for me because I'm the same way. But I think it's a little more urgent this year.
That's true. I mean, it gives you more to. I went to my local game store just yesterday. I was looking for some stuff, and even like the Game Boys and stuff, people are clearing them out because they just want something to play. Whatever passes the time and stuff. So that'll conclude the video game portion of our show. We don't stick on video games that long, so thanks for sticking with us. Some people might enjoy that, some people might not. But we're gonna move forward here as sports slowly start to come back. We mentioned we'll bring this up too since we'll close up the NBA talk. Players are starting to arrive in Orlando in the bubble. They probably could have given that a cooler name, but they're sticking with the bubble. I actually listened to JJ Redick of the Pelicans speak on how impressed he was with the functionality because every team shows up at a different time, so people aren't like commingling, and how they got there and the plan was together and they got them to their room and stuff. Obviously, it's going to be a thing to be stuck in a hotel room for 2 months, 3 months, depending on how far you get in this. And the food has been a topic of conversation with some players. But overall, I think players they're happy with the accommodations. I think the food will get better as things go on. I think it was just like you're here your first day thing. But as players start to get in Orlando, it's closer to starting. This bubble thing is starting to become real. It's not just a concept anymore. We're really getting rolling.
Yeah, I saw this guy post some on Twitter, this picture and I see this nice hotel room with the amenities that you would see like at a La Quinta or like like one of those nicer hotels. I don't know if La Quinta's super nice.
It's nice for us, maybe not for an NBA player.
I don't know about you, Mr. Phil, but I'm not exactly going to 5-star hotels every night. No. But it looked pretty nice to me with amenities that you would find at a 4 or 5-star. And then I opened the picture and it's referencing Rajon Rondo, and he put a Motel 6 comparison at the front, and it is just hilarious to me because these NBA guys seem to be, with that picture and the amount of backlash with the food and with the the amenities, and then all of a sudden guys like Joel Embiid's wearing an hazmat suit because he believes there's no safety. Right. I just think they're not mad about any of the amenities. It's just the situation that we're in, and the fact that they have to do all these extra sacrifices and they're getting no extra money for it. They're just not getting the pay cut to not play games. That's the only thing. But the pushback to me is amazing, but the NBA can't do any better of a job. I mean, they literally are crossing every T with the with the treatment to the players, to the bubble and how tight it is. I mean, you can't even bring family for the regular season, and that's just insane, but it is a necessary evil. And I think of all the 3 major sports, the most likely team or league to finish a year, and I think it's almost a guarantee that they'll finish the year, is the NBA. I mean, with just how tight it is, how few players there are to test and are to keep on the wraps, I think it's a done deal. They're going to have a champion, and they're doing a pretty good job of it, considering they're in an absolute hot spot, one of the few in America, that being Florida.
Yeah, and I do think the other thing is, like, no basketball is being played yet. I think they're just getting there. They have nothing to do but be in these hotels. And, anytime you walk into a new place, even mentally, you're going to critique it a little bit, like, oh, that's nice. That's not so nice. What is that over there? Like, I think once basketball, even when practice starts on a consistent basis and games start being played, they're just going to get in the zone. I mean, all these guys played AAU. They know what it's like to travel and be hanging out in hotels and stuff. I think a lot of guys are going to embrace it after a while. Like you said, the person I heard speak on it was JJ Redick, one of the more like calm guys in the league. He was saying like, hey, the food could be better, but the food could be a lot worse, like, because that seems to be the hot button thing. I do think when people get going and once games are being played, they're going to zone in on that, So I do think this is as rocky as it gets, which isn't really rocky at all. It's just people showing up. Every time you go to a hotel, you got to realize, you think like, oh, how's the bathroom? How's this? How's the water pressure? How's everything else going? Do I have more towels? I think you spent more time in hotels in your line of work being an announcer and traveling than I have. So, like, I'm sure you know even more than me. But I do think it's going to be fine. There might be a couple of guys that are a little more, shall I say, high maintenance that might find issues that other guys.
Good word for it.
Yeah, but overall, I think they're going to be fine. I think once they start, it's going to be, gung-ho, all speed ahead.
Yeah, you go to a hotel and the first night, you're mesmerized. It's like, wow, they have a giraffe that's hanging from this giant glass wall, and they have like these huge waterfalls and everything. And then, a couple days in, you're like, oh, giraffe again, 5 stories of and all the view of the city and everything. So it is something I think they're going through right now. When you start playing games every other day and you start treatment and practice throughout the week and you leave the arena, first of all, you have other games to watch too. So you can watch, some of your friends play, across the league. I think you're just going to be too tired to complain, and you're going to have too much going on to complain. So, I think there are way worse options than having, a giant conference room, having bowling alleys at your disposal, having, all these NBA games that you can watch live and nobody else can. I think they'll be able to survive there, Phil. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I think they're going to be fine. And if nothing else, just from these past couple days, MLS kind of got to jump on this. Major League Soccer, they've had their guys in their biodome. Season kicked off on Wednesday with Orlando City getting the win over Inter Miami, 2-1 Nani with a 97-minute game winner right past the keeper. So go Lions on that. But
we all saw that, Phil.
Yes, exactly. I just had to bring it up. We have not, it's been a while since we've gotten 3 points, so it just has to get talked about. But MLS has proven that it can work. They've had 2 teams drop out of the tournament because when they got there and got tested, FC Dallas and Nashville, of all places, they ended up dropping out because of the testing positives being way too high. Everyone else has been fine. There was, I think, 8 total positive cases throughout the whole rest of the league. So that's pretty good. And that's including like staff members too. So they've proven that it can work. It's kind of nice that they got the jump on this. I think the NBA will get it done too. And I think, again, once the games get going, it'll be fine. MLS is a really good, the funniest thing about that is they had a game, our game was at 8 o'clock at night. The next morning, Philadelphia kicked off at 9 a.m. And if that doesn't bring you back to your little kid days of Little League soccer, I don't know what does. Kicking off a major league sporting event at 9 a.m. is definitely
9 a.m. That's
waking
awesome.
up with your coffee and your cereal and watching MLS was definitely an experience the other day.
So for the few fans that for some weird reason isn't watching MLS from 9 a.m. to midnight, could you tell the fans what the MLS is doing to prevent the spread of the virus, from the fans to how they treat the players?
So really, it's very similar, and being in Orlando also, it's very similar to what the NBA is now about to start. I mean, they have the teams, I think they're separated by floor, and there's a couple different hotels because there's, 22 teams total that are participating, so a little less than the NBA, or right around the same, actually, because of the teams that aren't participating. So it's really very similar, and we've had they kind of had to shift the schedule around with the 2 teams not participating, but their goal was to have at least 2 games a day, a morning and an afternoon, or an afternoon and a night. So they're I think NBA is going to, at the end of the day, have more games per day once they get rolling, at least in that early stages. But honestly, I would say it's very similar to what the NBA is doing, which is why they look at this and they see that it's working. It's going to make them that much more confident that it'll work for basketball as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're doing all the precautions they need. When you think about it, from hotel to the gym, I know coronavirus is airborne. There's bound to have 1 or 2 people get the virus, but I'm trying to figure out how possibly the coronavirus could somehow meander into a gym that's locked to fans, meander into a hotel where they're the only people going there, meander into the room service. It's hard to even conceive there being a situation where anybody gets coronavirus. But even soccer, you could think it's an outdoor sport. It would be easier, and they're able to pull this off so far. Yeah. So I think the NBA is very realistic to finish this up.
Well, Nick, as you know, I'm not a doctor, and I don't even play one on TV. But I have to agree with you. I think once everybody's locked in and everyone locked in confirmed doesn't have it, you got to be good. Like, again, maybe it sneaks in. Maybe the friend of one of the cooks he hangs out, like that's the only way, because some of the employees aren't locked. Like this, I think the chefs in particular aren't locked in. So that's maybe how that works. But overall, I'm pretty positive, about how it's going to go. Seeing the MLS start is, makes me think that the NBA is going to be fine. A situation that's not looking quite as good is our beloved college football, as the Ivy League has canceled not only football, but all fall sports. All the smart kids are saying, we're out of here. We're not dealing with this. Not shocked at this news, because if any conference cares the least about its athletics, it's going to be all these Ivy League schools that are, have doctors and lawyers, and not so much NFL players. Granted, there is a few. Obviously, Ryan Fitzpatrick would be the first to tell you that from the Ivy League. But this didn't shock me. I don't think this is the nail in the coffin everybody thinks it is, but it is definitely worth noting. Like, it's a big step to not only cancel football, but all fall sports. And they've even said they won't even entertain bringing anything back until January 1 of next year.
Yeah, I hear the argument, which makes me laugh. Like, these guys at the SEC and the Big Ten who are, working these conferences and are part of the athletic departments, they want to one day work in the Ivy League. I'm like, what? Like, how is that even like the argument you're having, and how they would cancel the season because one day they want to be, the athletic director of Harvard or something. So, or Princeton. So I just find that hilarious. With that said, I think, the Ivy League, it's not going to, people in the other conferences aren't going to look at the Ivy League and think we have to shut down because they are. Because in college football, I looked it up, not just the Ivy League, but the Patriot League, who apparently is going to probably follow suit with the Ivy League.
Mhm.
I mean, they have the Ivy League has nobody who they play outside of the Patriot League in Division I football, and the Patriot League has like one or two, and they are other FCS schools. So there isn't any major complications when it comes to that. But I do think what the Big Ten did is significant because you start thinking about college football playoff requirements, and I love the 4-team playoff, and I believe we're going to go to 8 pretty soon. But when it comes to the arguments made, it's tough enough when you have teams not playing the same non-conference level schedule. And now you consider, Alabama, let's say, for instance, plays 12 games, and Michigan plays 10, and both of them are undefeated, hypothetically. Michigan, there's no way they'll do that. With that said, I think that creates some problems where I think other conferences might just say we've got to follow suit and only do conference games.
Yeah, here's my question though, because does it mean when you play only conference games, does that mean you're not replacing some out of conference games with other conference teams? If that makes sense, if there's enough of them, so would they still play their 12 games? Because your normal schedule is 8 games in conference typically, and then you play your 3 to 4 out of conference. So I mean, does everyone just jump into an 8-game season? Is that what's
That's the problem because SEC is 8, and if I'm not mistaken, Pac-12 is 9, and ACC is 9 too. I'm forgetting.
Yeah, it's hard to.
But I think they've got to figure out a way to do something like that. But I think, this is my optimistic side thinking. I think for the FBS, which has too much money to lose, I think they would be interested in doing a fall season, not to mention the NFL draft. Too much is on the line there.
Yeah,
I think they will do anything they can. I'm 50-50 on if they'll do a fall season, but my optimistic side believes they will. And I think the most realistic scenario is conference. You can't trust FCS schools are going to have the regimens of the FBS. They're going to do drastic testing. And, no fans, of course, and I think they're just going to roll with the punches. Conference season is great because it gives them an extra month runway to get everybody together because you see different NCAA teams canceling their voluntary workouts. I don't think there's a way they can start in late August, but I think what we're going to see, I think I'm more 60-40 the more that I think about it. Conference season, 8 to 9 games for FBSs. FCS, I'm not quite as optimistic about you guys.
Yeah. I mean, 8 to 9 is fine because there's plenty of teams that only play 12 and some play 13. So like a 1-game difference, we deal with that now. So I don't think that's going to be a problem. This might be one of the few times that we don't copy off the smart kids because I do think they're going to figure out their own thing aside from what the Ivy League has done. And when people hear like me and you, like non-sports people, like in our lives or whoever is out there, they hear us talk about trying to be optimistic, and they're like, "Oh, you just want sports. You're not listening to the facts." I don't think people realize how much universities need athletics. I think people that don't watch sports don't realize how important they are. Stanford just cut 11 athletic programs. Stanford, that's probably the biggest school that's not an Ivy League, right? I mean, they're like right below what you'd consider an Ivy League school. So if they're already cutting 11 athletic programs, that's 11 teams worth of people no longer probably having the ability to go to Stanford because they were on scholarship.
Yeah, I gotta chime in real quick.
Sure.
Stanford won the 2019 Learfield Directors Cup, which is given to the NCAA institution with the most excellence according to Learfield in athletics. That includes everything from football to fencing, rowing, swimming, and diving. So, because they won the 2019 men's volleyball and they were very competitive in swimming and rowing and whatnot, and who cares about those except for the Directors Cup when it comes to football and comes to all this stuff. I'm not trying to be insensitive here. I'm just trying to say that those sports don't make quite the money that football does. However, Stanford, I mean, you think about them as an academic school, they couldn't have done any better than Directors Cup in athletics in general. So if they're cutting 11 programs. That's got to be pretty concerning for the rest of the country.
Yeah, I mean, before I heard that, I know earlier in the year, University of Cincinnati Bearcats had to cut their men's and women's, I believe, soccer programs. And we have a guy from Daytona that ended up switching there. So that was a team I was keeping my eye on. And,
Right.
He's obviously going to continue his career somewhere else, but you don't hear that happen. Like when UAB lost their football program, it was huge news, and it came back 2 years later. And they've been great since they've been back. But it's usually huge news. There's so many of them that you almost have to do the research yourself to see what's being cut because there's too many to keep track of. And that's not a world we want to live in. Like you said, not all these sports get the passion following that others do. But I think we all know we either have a friend that has played softball or volleyball or swim or was a competitive swimmer or gymnastics. And while it's not something that you necessarily follow, when you see them in it and you see the passion of the people that do follow it, wrestling even, that's another one. People don't realize how big of a deal it is in certain parts of the country that doesn't really get funded the way it should. And the people that it matters to, like, it's really ripping out their heart, if that happens. So it's something just because we don't watch it with the same eye that we watch college basketball, college baseball, and football, like, doesn't mean it doesn't matter. It matters to a lot of people. And it's a lot more connected to the well-being of a university than most people realize, I think.
Oh, yeah, for sure. A lot of those big schools, they have it, privately funded. With the smaller schools, there's usually some sort of a funding from the NCAA, from the institution itself to make those sports possible. But, in the FBS, and I hope you guys can pay attention to me. It looks like I'm broadcasting next to the sun. It got really bright behind me for some weird reason. However, it does emphasize a bigger deal here with these NCAA schools. The coronavirus, I think, exacerbates the problem, which is a lot of these sports outside of football and basketball across the country. You would think, with a school like the University of Cincinnati probably having, thousands of fans for every men's soccer game, to believe that they are losing the amount of money they did. I don't know if you read the article I did, but the school posted something saying they expected a near $1 million loss for men's soccer that football would have been able to supplant, and they would gain that money back. It was like $740,000. It was just amazing. How do you lose that much money competing in soccer, which isn't like a 50-game season like volleyball is in some of these other sports?
Sure.
So it does expose the bigger issue, which is a lot of these sports, which the NCAA kind of, I don't know the exact ruling, but they kind of, they want these schools to keep these other sports. I think we may see a world soon after the coronavirus where a lot of schools, they aren't going to hold 30 sports like Stanford used to have.
I mean, football, basically, almost every other sport operates at a loss. Like a handful, way less than anybody realizes, a handful of basketball schools make profit, and even less baseball, right? Like Duke, Michigan State, North Carolina, their basketball teams make money. Or Oregon basketball and Texas might not make money. I know that blows people's mind in basketball anyway. Like, I think people don't realize football, not only do they make money, but they save the butt of all the other programs. It's really it's a pretty depressing system. So like you said, it might be something that needs to get revamped. I mean, I don't think it's as simple as, soccer, being more regionalized and don't travel to the other side of the country to play a game, schedule a team. If you're in Florida, play in Georgia, don't go play in California. Maybe that's the thing. I'm sure that's not the first one that's thought of. If I'm thinking of it, someone else has already thought about it, I'm sure. But yeah. So, I mean, it is interesting. We obviously would love college football in any capacity for not one, because we love it. And two, it really supports a lot of other things that people, go to these universities and maybe don't like sports, but don't realize how much it really affects the university that they're at. And I think as these programs, some don't play and some will play less games, they're going to notice the effects around their campus when they go back to school.
Yeah, when people say, NCAA schools need to pay their athletes, or the NCAA, because of how much money the school is making to have them play, it's obviously way more complicated than that. And, it is insane to consider the amount of lives that have been negatively affected for the long term. If you're a freshman who just signed with Stanford to one of those sports that just got cut, and it's the thought process is to transfer to another school. But first of all, you don't know if that school is cutting their program now because of coronavirus. And second, most likely the roster's already set for this year. So you're not competing in Division I athletics this year just because the school canceled the program. I think that's the beginning. I think that's the domino that's significant, you know, of the two. Ivy League and Big Ten is something. I think Stanford and Cincinnati is a whole lot more.
Yeah, definitely. And I do think, I mean, if you're a college athlete, let's say you're a women's soccer player or a, you know, men's, you know, swimmer, and you got accepted athletically to Stanford, that's like a crowning achievement of someone's life. And now it's been taken away from you from a situation that it was under nobody's control, you know, and that's when it's something that you did, or you can say this person did this to me for this reason, it's a little bit easier to stomach than when it just happens, you know. When there's no one to blame, when the enemy is invisible as it is right now, like it makes it even more stressful. But like you said, I'm maybe 60-42 about college football. I think it's safe to say NFL is happening in some capacity because it's not students, it's grown men with contracts and everything. So I'm not as worried about that, but hopefully in the next couple weeks we're going to get some more new – the picture will at least be clear about college football, I think, coming up, because the clock is ticking at this point.
It certainly is ticking. I think, you know, before we bounce off of this topic, I think the best solution, you know, me from a distance, not only are we not doctors talking about coronavirus, but we're not working in the NCAA department, this arena, the economic department. Yeah. But I think the only feasible solution in the near future is to just say, here's 8 to 10 sports. NCAA schools cannot support any more than that. I think I'm vowing to keep, you know, soccer, keep volleyball, keep some of these significant sports, cross country, track and field, and then baseball, football, basketball. That's 7 or 8 right there, and you know, maybe 1 or 2 that a school wants to have a choice, like
if they specialize in it,
right. You know, along the coast, beach volleyball would be interesting. You know, more inside. Probably something like swimming and diving or something. I don't know. But
depending on where you are,
Right. So I think that's the solution. And then, you know, to touch on college football, I think the only way where everybody is happy and schools don't go completely bankrupt, or they've got to cut sports this year, is you have conference play, and you take the loss, unfortunately. You take the loss of not playing non-conference. We probably, if we did that, wouldn't have a playoff, because you got to think, all right, now everybody's got to come to one central location. And if there's too many cases, that may just be too dangerous. No fans, and, you know, that's about it. And then we crown a champion based off of what we used to do in the BCS, which is just a rating system, and that's it. And it's unfortunate, but that's kind of the way I think everybody's happy, and we don't have a disastrous situation to us. Yeah. We don't get to watch college football this year.
Right, and there's also the concept of, you know, you might be taking a step back, but it's to then take a step forward in the future, you know, instead of trying to push forward, tripping, and not getting back up is the way I would say it, trying to ignore everything. And, you know, you can't if you have to sacrifice a year, make sure you have a plan for after that. Like, there's plenty of leagues like minor league baseball, you know, Daytona Tortugas that I work for, that season's been canceled. But they have already started looking at next season. They are not, you know, them as a team and as a league, a Florida State league, if they're going to cancel, they're already looking towards next year. So that's what you have to do. You have to be ready. You have to figure out other situations. And I think some of these smaller leagues, arena football, similar thing, they're already looking towards next year. It's a dreary time. I haven't done a lot of like coronavirus talk on the show because, one, it gets depressing, but two, it really, you know, it's inevitable eventually. I'm surprised I lasted as long as I did without, but as close as we're getting to football and college football, you know, it needed to be discussed. So we're still in a wait and see. Like I said, 60-40 is about where I'm at, same as you. But at this point, just got to wait and see.
I don't think ultimately with all of the money on the line from TV to, you know, these schools supporting these sports, that they could afford to just say, we're not going to have a college football season. And to think of having next year, having double the amount of players eligible for the NFL draft into one draft. I mean, that would be
something, yeah.
Insane. So, you know, and they're talking about, well, we just have the draft for the eligible players anyways. I mean, that would just be insane if there's no college football and whatnot. So, because then there'd be the whole thing of, well, Trevor Lawrence only got to play 2 years or something. I don't know. So I don't know how that all would work, but I just think ultimately there's too much to lose here for FBS. Now, I believe for FCS and Division II, Division III, with the limited amount of money and TV time that they have, it's unfortunate, but it doesn't look too great.
I agree. But I'm with you. I think the closing comment there's a little too much to lose. And, I mean, everything else is being operated with a risk. You go to a restaurant, that's a risk. You go to Publix, you go to a grocery store, that's a risk. Sports is going to operate with a risk just like everything else. I think that's where it's going to have to be at this point. But time flies when you're having fun. Nick, this has been a good open discussion here today. I know you've been on plenty of times, but let people know how they can get in touch with you on the interwebs there.
All right. Yep. Look at Nick the Kid Rice. You could see all of the Chargers tweets that you didn't know you needed, but now you got to have. Yep. So Nick the Kid Rice, follow me on Twitter.
Yep. And then you got Charger Dude 95 on YouTube. We talked about the ESFL last time. He's got another thing he's going there. He's simulating the Chargers seasons dating back to, what was it, 2008, 9, right? You're starting with
2009. Yep, we're doing that. And also, just the spoiler, there's something I'm planning on doing with college football. So even though you don't have the actual, we don't know what's going on with the actual season, stay tuned. Charger 95's got something for you.
Yeah, I wonder what that could be. I guess I'll have to tune in like everybody else.
We'll see.
So, yeah, thank you guys for listening today. Also, follow me on Twitter at PhilTalkSports. Let us know how the show is. If you have a topic that you want brought up or a question or a comment, definitely let us know. Thank you all for watching on YouTube and listening on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I'm Phil. That's Nick. See you next time.
All right.